Hello there. Welcome to episode 2 of Bow and Blade, a podcast brought to you by medievalists.net, where all things medieval come alive. Bow and Blade gives you a seat at the bar as scholars of medieval warfare go beyond the Wikipedia articles to talk about the debates and questions that we're working on today. I'm Michael Livingston, professor at the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina.
And I'm Kelly DeVries, professor at Loyola University of Maryland, honorary historical consultant for the Royal Armouries. We're going to talk about weapons.
I love that you've got such a cool title, man. I'm jealous. What are you drinking tonight? What are you drinking tonight?
No you, though. No you.
There's no you, not none or not that.
No you. Yeah. Got rid of it for that.
What are you drinking tonight at the bar?
Well, in view of the fact that we've got some Northerners coming in, some of those rough-necked bicycle gangs, motorcycle gang, ship gangs called the Vikings, as well as Scots and a few Northern English. It's got to be mead, dude. It's got to be mead. I hate mead, but for this occasion, I'm drinking honey.
I don't condone drinking of mead just because it gave me the worst hangover I've ever had in my life. But it was really good going down. So there was that. So I'm drinking a glass of wine tonight. I figured a good blood red blend seemed appropriate for today's topic, which is the Battle of Brunanburh, which many of our listeners probably just think that I sneezed or something just now. Like, what is that word? Brunanburh. But this was a big deal. So we're going to talk about it tonight.
Big deal. The wine, of course, not grown locally at that point. So we'll say the Vikings stole it from French.
Stole it from somebody. You know they stole it from somebody.
Stole it from somebody. Yeah. Deep bloody red, though.
Deep bloody red. It's got to be.
So that kind of brings me to this. Mike has written a book on the Battle of Brunanburh. In fact, he's written 2. He's written a case book. So for those of you who are academics, want all the original sources, he's put them in there with some essays that will explain the original sources that are in there. And we'll talk about these today. But you've just written a book came out in 2020, I believe, with Osprey, one of their bigger book series. And for some reason, it doesn't say Battle of Brunanburh except after the colon. It's the first bit is never greater slaughter. Explain that.
Yeah. So, the full title is Never Greater Slaughter, as Kelly said, Brunanburh and the Birth of England. I'll say the reason that we kind of decided to do it that way is we thought if the book's titled Brunanburh, nobody's going to buy it because they won't know what the hell it is. So we thought, well, this would be snazzy. And the reason Never Greater Slaughter worked so well is this is actually a quote from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, from 2 copies of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. There's an amazing poem just stuck into the Chronicle. Normally a Chronicle entry is something like, this year, Bishop so-and-so kicked the bucket. Like, that's it. But on this entry, it's 937 is the year. And there is this incredible poem, really amazing poem. And it's all about the Battle of Brunanburh. It's first place I ever heard of the battle was reading this in Old English. And one of the concluding lines in it is never greater slaughter was there on this island. Never as many folk felled before this by the sword's edge. It's this just amazing statement of how horrific this fight was. So it worked well for a book title.
Now we've talked. Mike and I have talked a lot about using poetry in our book on Crecy. We've got a very important poem 2 very important poems by eyewitnesses. And we talk about the emphasis that a poem has for this. So, why do you think that this is almost being double emphatic then? They're talking about this great slaughter, but they're doing it in poetic form.
Yeah, the use of poetry is definitely something that, as you said, you and I have really kind of fixated on. This stuff got ignored by a lot of historians that, that's poetry, it's literary, it doesn't really have anything to do with history. But to the medieval mind, this was the best way to preserve information was in poetic form. It was the most reliable way. we kind of think the opposite now. We think of poetry as the place of metaphor and sort of indirect discourse. That's not really quite the way it was in the Middle Ages. It was much more reliable to have things in poetry because they'd be more likely to be preserved correctly, and not be subject to scribal intervention or whatever. So you have all that, and it's also the conveyance of information that poetry also allows, through metaphor when it is used, and through imagery, is just an extraordinary vessel for talking about the awful horrors of medieval warfare. So yeah, Kelly, you're absolutely right there in talking about some of these poems that we came across for the Battle of Crécy, which maybe we'll do an episode on later on. One of them in particular, I mean, I never tire of teaching this poem and introducing it to students because it's mind-blowing how extraordinary it is and how much trauma is contained within the poem. But I think the same is kind of true of the Battle of Brunanburh poem. It's got
I
a
think
lot.
very much so. I mean, it was introduced to me as an undergrad in a class in Old English literature that was through translation. I then read it later in Old English, but it was there as a literary format, but as one that was accurate or seemed to be accurate. Now, I'm not sure my professor said that with this poem because it was about a battle, and he said, "Oh well, how exaggerated are these?" We'll get to that question in just a second. But the one thing is that it is so emotive. Poetry is an emotive means of displaying this. Does that mean that accuracy is sometimes removed because of this? I mean, what I guess I'm asking is, do you think this was Never Greater Slaughter?
I think it was. I don't think this is an exaggeration, and I think part of the reason why I feel confident in that is because we have other sources that talk about this battle. This isn't our only source. You mentioned the casebook that I edited with an amazing team of international scholars worked on this thing, and we brought together every source that talks about the Battle of Brunanburh, and put them together in the original and translation so anybody could use them. And it was a lot of sources. There were a bunch that I didn't know about when I went into the project. And so that was always really amazing. And they all speak to the same idea, the same fact that there was this event, that in fact, a generation later, they wouldn't even call it by name. They would just say the Great Battle. And everybody knew what you were talking about. It was like that thing. Yeah, the Great Battle. And I mean, this is an age of warfare. Not that everybody was always running around killing each other. A lot of this period was very boring, but there was a lot of military conflict. And within that context, they could just say the Great War, the Great Battle, and everybody was like, yeah, I know which one you mean. It's that one. Speaks to how extraordinary it was. And the poem definitely captures that. Yes, there are what we would call kind of tropes and things in it. It talks about the ravens and the wolves coming for the bodies, and you could sort of say, well, that's just poetic stuff. But no, that's actually what happened. Like that's what would happen after these things.
If I'm a raven or a wolf, I see this as a big time feast.
Yeah, we've actually got these studies that show at that point the movement of armies would bring ravens. Would just start following the army because they knew bodies are going to show up. Like, let's just start following these people. So it looks like a trope in many ways, but it also just reflects reality. That's the way things were in an event like this, which was, it Never Greater Slaughter. This was the big one.
This is a big one.
Yeah.
So, it's a chronicle, as we say, Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written over a long period of time in various places. That's why those of you who read the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle always see an A or a B or a C or a D or an E on the end of it. That's just indicating which one of these traditions it takes on. But I guess there was the possibility that, let's say in Hastings, writing about Hastings a couple of centuries later, you say, well, actually, this was Never Greater Slaughter. The other one wasn't quite, this one was. Nobody really says that. Nobody goes back and says, yeah, it still remains the single Never Greater Slaughter in an Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.
Yeah. And it's the one that, to despite that, kind of gets forgotten, right? Hastings sort of resets so much of what history had been on the island, and as a result, Brunanburh is kind of, drifts away. It remains there. Like in the 14th century, there's poetic these big stories, which the name Brunanburh isn't there, but it's these stories about a Danish giant coming that has to be defeated by the King of England, and it's Brunanburh. Like that's the event as it has traveled through time, and it's kind of lost. It's been disconnected in many ways, but the vestige of it. There was this moment where we as a nation were almost destroyed by Danes, Vikings, however you want to put that. They still remembered that, like they remembered that part of it. So it's a fascinating moment.
Well, now we've let out the spoiler. Spoiler alert, you just found out that the battle was very, very brutal. So let's go back and talk about who was there and why. I mean, we've got the King of England. You just mentioned his name, so let's start with him.
Yep.
Who is it, and why is he the King of England at that point? Why does he feel take really this on his own? He doesn't have any allies per se.
Yeah, so the King of England is Æthelstan, and he is a grandson of Alfred the Great, who's done so much to kind of save Anglo-Saxon England, if you want to call it that, and to push back against the Vikings who had been invading, for decades. So by the time Alfred's done, you have a pretty stable region in the south. Obviously centered in Wessex, which is where he was from, but it's expanded now. He cut a deal with the Vikings, cut the England in like cut a line across it, a big diagonal line, said you all on that side, we're on this side, we got a treaty, all this stuff. But in the subsequent years, his family has continued to push those borders back. And the Vikings are not exactly pleased about that. Like, we had a deal, we signed a treaty, and now you're pushing us back. And those decades are really violent, and a lot of political machination and things going back and forth. Because as the English are pushing their borders out, not only are the Vikings getting kind of ticked off about this, but north of them, people are getting ticked off, which is the Scots and the Britons. They're getting ticked off, and the Welsh are getting ticked off. And like everybody's mad about this. Nobody's happy about this. and kind of one by one, Æthelstan, by the time you get to Æthelstan, he and his immediate predecessors have basically like kicked all these people, kicked them very, very hard, kind of put them under their thumb. And at some point, and we don't know when, we don't know where, a group of these people get together who've been kicked by Æthelstan, and they're mad as hell. They've all been killing each other too. It's not like they've all been murdering each other. And so this is like a gathering of enemies who came together and said, you know that I hate you. Yes, I hate you too. Sorry, I killed your dad, 2 years ago. Well, yeah, sorry, I killed your brother. You know who we all hate worse? Those English. Like, we hate them worse. Let's stop killing each other. Just time out. Let's go kill them. And so we get this remarkable.
Hold on before we get the enemies, because they're good and everything. I want to go back to one thing you said, because we always give credit to Alfred as being the one who combines England, is the first king of England, so to speak. And so we have this idea that he's the one who's having to fight battles against the great Danish army. He's the one who has to do all this stuff. But then you just said, and I think it's important to get a little more understanding about that really the two generations after Alfred are much more violent than before. Why do you think that was the case? That it wasn't, Alfred didn't solve things?
Well, he didn't solve things. I mean, he manages to get things solved to a sort of a stalemate, right? We have the violence of the Battle of Edington and things like that, where we get an initial pushback against the Vikings. The Vikings at that point, what had happened to the Great Heathen Army, was that it sort of petered out a little bit, so that when he's able to kind of push back, a status quo was quickly reached. And what makes that fall apart is the unwillingness of his successors to abide by that. Even he himself, he actually starts breaking the treaty too,
Yeah,
pretty
yeah. Well,
quickly, pretty quickly.
what a treaty!
Yeah, I mean, do you look at the ground and see a line? I don't see a line. Screw it, we're going over
right.
it. And his successors especially doing this, and this, not to say the Vikings were blameless, because you also then have like succeeding generations of Vikings who were like, well, we're going to beat our dads, at this game, right? Dad signed this treaty. I didn't. I'm going to one up him and beat these people for sure. So it's kind of it's really that sort of second generation of conflict, which honestly tends to be historically worse, because everybody feels like they've got like something to prove in this. And so,
well, and there's nobody to remember Alfred's time. I mean, Athelstan's born after Alfred's dead, is he?
No, he's alive.
He's alive,
yeah.
But he wouldn't remember that there was a time where the Vikings the Great Heathen Army was fighting. So we really have a new generation of individuals who didn't know the old generation.
But they knew the stories, and they had an axe to grind as a result. And that
I like the axe to grind, because that actually was happening.
Usually ground it in people. And it's so it that second wave from both sides is just tremendously awful. And it's coinciding with the death of leaders such that at a place like York, you have changeover between who's politically controlling that, and the vacuum and uncertainty of those kind of political shifts obviously brings people into the field to fight over it, right? So one, again, the fact is that in the chaos, that foments its own violence, and these people already kind of wanted to do it, so it snowballs. But the English were fairly consistently getting the upper hand. Fairly consistently getting in the upper hand. And part of that's because...
So now bring in these enemies.
Yeah, well...
Who do we have? I mean, we don't have a single force against a single force. It's not the English versus French, say, there's the 100 Years' War. Might have several battles. We've got the English versus...
Everybody.
Everybody
but the Welsh. This is really a curious kind of thing. We have a Welsh poem that appears to date from right before the Brunanburh event. That is a poem written by a Welshman. It's in Welsh poetry. It's using all the Welsh. It's not a translation of something else. It's this Welsh bard, and he is asking for everybody to get together and kill the English. He actually calls them, and I'm going to use a naughty word for any of our listeners, cover your ears if need be, the shitheads of Thanet is what he calls them, which is a reference to Thanet Island, where the Anglo-Saxons first came ashore. And that's the literal translation. It's just wonderful. He's like, the shitheads. We're going to drive them to the sea. Let's exterminate them. And he says specifically, let's get together, us the Welsh, the Scots, and the Vikings of Ireland, who've taken up residence in Dublin. We all have been killing each other. That's the reason that the English are able to defeat us. Let's all get together and do this. That is what comes to pass, but the Welsh don't participate. We've no idea why. We've got some theories, but we don't know for sure. So at some point, these leaders get together. We don't know where, we don't know when, but we do know who. And we know that it's Anlaf, who is the leader of the Vikings in Dublin. It is Constantine, who is the king of Scotland. And it is a guy named Owain, who is the king of the people of Strathclyde. They're Britons. So you've got the Scots, the Britons, and the Vikings, and sort of all these other little kings who are like king of Ireland here and there, whatever. Like, there are minor kings in the Hebrides, all these other folks as well, who were there. Either we know they were there, or we can infer that they were there. The Anglo-Saxon poem, that we started off with, says there were, at the end of the battle, 5 kings lay dead on the field. Well, that's some of these other little kings too were clearly there. So they all got together, made a plan. We don't know whose idea it was. We know that they show up on like 615 ships, bring this combined army. It's a combined fleet of all these people, all got on board ships and show up. This is the biggest fleet that has shown up in memory. Like, did Caesar have a bigger fleet? Like, you'd have to go back to get something that big. I don't think Caesar showed up with that big a fleet.
I don't think he did too. I mean, even Claudius in eventually taking over England, doesn't have that big fleet. I'm not even certain, and I'd have to go back to the siege of Paris. I don't think the siege of Paris was taken on by this number of ships.
I mean, with Rollo?
With Rollo, yeah. I don't think it died. Well, first of all, I don't think the Seine could handle them all. But,
I don't think it's that many. We have the number in one of the chronicles.
We do have the number, yeah.
But I don't think it's
we'll get to the siege of Paris later on in the later on in Blade and Arrow. Yeah. Blade and
I mean, it is a massive force, and as I said, it's a combined force. And once they hit, Æthelstan, in responding, he doesn't have anybody to call upon. Mm-hmm. This is everybody. So it's him against everybody but the Welsh again. Like, maybe the Welsh were there and nobody recorded it, but that would be kind of weird.
I don't think so.
I don't think the Welsh were.
Well, for example, we do have a very famous Viking, or who will become very famous, fighting with Alfred, or fighting with Æthelstan.
Fighting with Æthelstan, yeah. Egil, Egil Skallagrimsson of Egil Saga fame. And in fact, there is a great battle that occurs, the Battle of Vinheath, it's called, occurs in Egil Saga, and that is at some remove the Battle of Brunanburh. And Egil's brother dies there. Egil composes some amazing poetry there on the battlefield in the aftermath. That's actually what I start my book with, is talking about Egil on the battlefield and composing this poetry. What Egil Saga describes of the battle is pretty loony bins. It's I don't think that's right, but what is being remembered there is Brunanburh. They're trying to sort of remember that moment. Egil probably was there. He probably did compose this poetry there, and they're sort of filling in the blanks with a kind of a greatest hits of Viking period warfare, all built into one battle kind of thing, is what they're doing.
And his brother died there.
Yeah, Thorolf, his brother, dies there, and he buries him, and composes on the spot, because Egil could do that. Egil was not somebody you want to be around, but he was a really amazing dude, but he was crazy, and also crazy, brilliant. Yeah. So
psychopathic brilliance. Really,
like, nice poem. Thank you for not killing me. Like,
thank you. But I mean, that kind of gives you an indication that we don't have this unified Vikings that we sometimes think about. These are the Vikings specifically from Ireland and around Dublin, and maybe some in the West Isles, but nothing like a huge Danish force or Norwegian force or Swedish force in under a local king, or under a big king. We're under a local king in this case.
Yeah, and they're determined. They're going to wipe the English off the islands. They're going to kick them out. This is an attempt to destroy them all. I often talk about this, and it so seems strange. I understand, but I talk about this. It's like the Battle of Britain. This is England alone against the Axis, basically, right? This is all the enemies banded together, and there's no victory is survival. If the English win, it's not like they got this great triumph, treasure, land, something. No, victory is survival. Like that's what's at stake here. It's existential, and that
really important. Really important, because England doesn't win this battle and then take over Dublin and take over Scotland and take over Strathclyde.
Right.
This isn't it's a defensive battle for Æthelstan. Now, if he had lost, who knows what would have happened on the opposite side?
Right.
But he had no intention of actually making acquiring these other spots.
Yeah, I mean, if he loses, do we have a Battle of Hastings? Well, there's no England to be conquered. Like everything goes out of whack, because again, it's just an existential fight, just like the Battle of Britain. What would have happened if Hitler wins the Battle of Britain? I mean, like that, everything changes, and that's what you get. And this doesn't happen all that often, frankly, that you have this kind of existential moment. Kelly and I both, we kind of poo-poo decisive battle folk. That sort of idea, but there are battles that are decisive in the sense that they really do represent a turning in history, and this I definitely think is one, in the sense that they survived.
So, well, all those enemies are going to come back and find England later on. So it's hardly decisive in the fact that once Æthelstan wins, he has all these enemies and he even puts them down. They're down for the moment.
Yeah. And Æthelstan dies not long after this. Poor guy, he dies, and then they all come screaming in, and then his heirs have to fight them all back. But that's for another story. But
but it is important to recognize. I think a couple of things from what you've been describing. First of all, that this isn't it's a huge battle. It's never greater slaughter. All this other, but it really doesn't decide a lot, except that the English get to be English again for as long as they are, until the next time that they aren't English, or somebody says they're not going to be English. And the other thing, of course, that comes out is the organization. So even though we don't know when this was planned, we don't have the minutes from a meeting that took place in some middle island off the coast of Scotland, where everybody came and met, and the Game of Thrones type weird thing, or Arthur and the Round Table or anything. We don't have any of that.
Yeah, they did not record the Zoom call. It was very.
But the organization is so obvious that had to have occurred. You think?
Yeah. Oh, it had to have, and it's one of the you and I are so fond of talking about, like, what is the thing we most wish we knew about something. I mean, for this, I wish I knew whose idea was it. When was that meeting, and what was agreed upon? To have this many people, it couldn't have just been like, we don't like them. I mean, obviously that was the underlying thing, right? But it also had to have been points of negotiation. Like, if we win, what does the landscape looks like? What do you get? What do I get? What does he get? And we don't have that. And I desperately wish we knew. I make some sort of speculative kind of stabs at it in my book, but those are best informed guesses. But that's what they are. They're guesses. I don't know, because they didn't record it. All the recordings of this we have are from the winning side, and we don't even know if they knew. Like, all they knew is, oh my God, look at all these people who have come trying to kill us. We got to fight.
I think it's important to recognize that these guys had a motive. The enemies of Æthelstan had a motive. They were going to do something, because if Æthelstan was not threatening their lands, and we don't see that he's doing that openly, he's not even threatening the Welsh openly. And they're nearer than Ireland or Scotland or Strathclyde. So if he's not threatening them openly, they want something of his.
They do, though. He had they're all paying him tribute at this point. The Vikings aren't. Everybody else is paying him tribute.
So a monetary motive is also good.
Yeah, the Welsh are being labeled sub-kings on English charters, as is Constantine, who had been subject 2 years earlier to an English invasion that had marched its way all the way up, supposedly at least the naval arm of it, reaching as far as Caithness, which is the very top of Scotland. So, and after that, Constantine signing off on English documents as a sub-king, sub-regulus, which is not the sort of thing a king
and
wants.
I love that term, sub-regulus, because you see it all along, and it is so obvious that, well, now you're down a step. You're a little less. You're a little less regulus than I'm regulus.
Yeah. So they've all had to do that. None of them like that. The Welsh and the Scots have paid tribute. They don't like that. But is that enough to have gone to all this trouble? They had to have had, like you said, a motive. They had to have some kind of plan for what the landscape would look like if they won. And we just don't know what that looks like, other than they were going to kill the English. That's what we know.
But when they get to the battlefield, we can talk about the battlefield in just a moment. But when they get to a battlefield, they actually do seem very organized, enough to also know not just what lands they're going to get at the end of it, but where they're going to be in this battle. I mean, nobody says, oh, I'm going to be closer here, I'm going to go over here. There's none of that in any of the records we have. They're very, very well ordered and disciplined.
It certainly seems to be. I mean, even from the English side, that's where we get all the records from. There is an impressiveness to what this army manages to do, and the shield wall that they managed to construct that has to be broken, which itself, of course, requires a certain level of organization. That's not something to throw together on the fly. And there's no distinction made between in the field of battle between the different groups. Everybody seems to be working together on the alliance side against the English.
Well, let's come back to the shield wall, because that's going to be a very important. But both sides have got shield walls, presumably, and we want to talk about the weapons and the style of warfare they're doing. But we got to locate it. So when you started this thing out, writing about Brunanburh in the casebook, there wasn't a map that you went to that said here it is, the cross over the battle or whatever it is, isn't that right? I mean, what do you do with the battle that's lost?
Yeah, and it was lost, right? So pretty much anywhere that had a B, an R, and an N in it, people claimed for Brunanburh. They were like, it happened in my backyard. And I certainly didn't appreciate that until the hate mail started rolling in after the book came out. And then I was like, oh, y'all are like, it's really important to you. Cool that you're into history. You really do think it's in your back garden. Okay. Wow. Well,
that's right.
Good for you.
I think the number of people who think important battles have been fought in their backyard goes up with English. Nobody in France is saying, Bouvines was fought right here in my backyard in Lausanne, Bouvines, something like that. But Brunanburh seemed to have elicited quite your discovery of the battlefield. So we could do that. Elicited a number of people who said, no.
Yeah, and I always want to be really careful on this. It's not like I'm Indiana Jonesing this stuff.
But you're pretty good at finding lost battlefields.
But you rely on other scholars and their work, and in the case of Brunanburh, there was a very good argument that was made by scholars of language, by linguists, who had put together that Brunanburh, if you kind of ran that forward into modern day, it would probably look a lot like the name Bromborough, which is actually a town on the Wirral. And in fact, if we look at old maps, we can find a Brunanburh, which is sort of halfway between those things, actually labeled on a map. So that's pretty indicative. And there were kind of local stories, though, and you and I are always talking about this. We got to be so damn careful with local stories, these Victorian stories of somebody dug up such and such or whatever. But there were.
It's found in Mrs. So-and-so's basement.
Yeah. Mrs. Smith has got the evidence. But there were stories. So there was reason to think, like, linguistically this works. Like what else? And what I started looking at is like the logistics of this. Does this make sense in terms of where we would anticipate a battle like this taking place. A lot of people were very against this. There's a lot of anti-Wirralists, they call themselves, because they don't think that the Wirral is an important place today and therefore cannot have been an important place then, and therefore like the battle couldn't have happened here. I find that kind of thinking just bizarre. Like none of that matters. Like, did it happen there? Yes or no? Like, and the evidence, the more that I've gotten into it, and of course a bunch of this is presented in the case book, and now in Nevergreater Slaughter, I've added more and more to the case to put an X on the map, the cross swords or whatever, which I had done in the case book. And that's, I think where a lot of the death threats started coming from was that I'd done this on the map, and people were like, how dare you, it's in my backyard. How dare you? You're an American. How dare you, like, fill in the blank. But yeah, that's probably where it was. And while all that was happening, there was then, I didn't know about this, but there was these incredible amateur archaeologists who were like, let's look under the X, like, let's see what we can find.
Before you get into that, I mean, I just got to say, Mike wrote me one time, and he says, that I've been corresponding with this local archaeology group. So as soon as you say local and archaeology together, all red flags start flying.
Yeah, we deal with this stuff.
But he said, we've been corresponding with this. We were doing work researching the Battle of Hastings. So he said, do you mind if we cut over from Leeds? We've been in a Leeds conference, cut over from Leeds and visit the Wirral and go down. And I thought, yeah, okay, well, let's go see. I figured we'd meet with, we were meeting actually in a parish church. I figured we'd meet with like 6 people who are sure that they found the actual skeleton of Æthelstan at some point, or one of these things. And then we also looped our wacky friend, Robert Wisdom Savage, who's the chief curator at that point of edged weapons at the Royal Armouries, although none of us even give him a fork. But so the 3 of us go wandering over there. No, it's not 3 guys. The pub, they took us immediately to a pub that was filled. There must have been 100 people there.
It was absolutely amazing. And if any of our friends from Wirral Archaeology are listening, what's up, y'all? You blew our minds.
What a great
you blew
welcome.
Our minds. It
great
was incredible. Because you and I walked into that. I remember we parked, and the 3 of us, and I was like, guys, I was like, look, I am sure the battle, I know exactly where the hell this battle happened. Like, I have no proof of that. There's no way that they've actually, like, and we kind of talked about it. Like, they probably found something and misidentified it. Like, but we want to encourage, we very much don't think that you have to have a PhD to engage in this kind of like, look, you're engaged in historical work. You love awesome. Welcome to the club, So we're like, well, we want to be encouraging, but also, try not to let them get too kind of over their head on this, like, all right, so.
Yeah, because they found it in their backyard, essentially what they've done.
Like, would I love if they found something? Sure. But let's be prepared. Yeah. And so we kind of walked into it with that in mind. And we go and do this spiel at the church, and we were like, all right, this is cool. Like, but I don't know. I still got some questions. And yeah, then they take us into this pub, and they've taken over the pub. And like I said, there's like 100 people there. It was insane. And they had filled this room of the pub with artifacts. And just looking around, obviously artifacts are, I talk about this in the book, they're like a Rorschach test. Like, what you see in them is what you're looking for, right? So if you're looking for an arrowhead, that's what you see in something that's shaped like an arrowhead. And that, you have to be really, really careful about that. And looking around.
Well, and you and I, as historians, we were probably more careful than Bob, because Bob is an artifactual expert. I mean, he deals with artifacts first. Yeah. And he was much more excited about these than we were. And they'd also done some really superior archaeological data gathering. So they had all these sites where they'd found this and everything. So this wasn't this was really pretty professional to those of us who work with
It
books.
was, especially given like the amount of money that they had to work with really tight budgets. It's volunteers. It was incredible what they had done. And it was clear, looking around, you're like, that's not medieval, like that's not medieval. That though,
There
that
weren't many
though,
of those,
that
though.
though,
Yeah.
that looks, and yeah, I remember Bob grabbing a couple pieces. Oh my gosh, Mike, look at this. And it was very surreal. It was very surreal. They were incredibly kind. Incredible.
Well, they weren't just incredibly kind. So Mike, having a PhD, being a professional historian, that had given them credibility that they really hadn't had up to this point in time. They'd never had somebody who was not associated with them locate the battle precisely where they had found all this stuff, where they wanted the battle located. So you were gave them the credibility that they were looking for in this. That it was fun to be on the sidelines and watch that.
Yeah. Oh well, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that my presence at all would be impressive, but or be helpful. But it was just an incredible.
You sure you weren't aware of it happening beforehand. I mean, there was some real remarkable gratitude given by the Wirral for having somebody outside say this is where the battle must have been from non-archaeological.
Well, it was fun. I mean, it was good times, and they continue to do incredible stuff. I mean, when I was finishing Never Greater Slaughter, the COVID hit. I'd been doing like 10 years of work on pieces of this, and it all sort of came together. Bernard Cornwell, who people probably know because he's one of the best known writers in the world,
and who will end his series with Uthar.
Yeah, he's got a series, the Saxon Shore series. Now it's relabeled as the Last Kingdom series. It was coming to a head with the last book was going to come out, which was going to culminate at Brunanburh. And I knew, I've known that for years because I first came into contact with Bernard Cornwell. We became friends because he was interested in my work on Brunanburh, and he had long since decided, I'm going to put it exactly where you put it. So he asks me to have brunch with him and to talk about my latest stuff because he was about to write the actual Battle of Brunanburh into his books. And so we met and had a wonderful time, and I gave him everything. Here's everything more that I've figured out or whatever. And he was like, yeah, I'm going to take some of that, and some of it I'm not going to take. It's not as I want to make it cooler than that. Like, whatever. Okay, cool. Had a great time. And he basically said, you should write like a popular history of this. And I was like, yeah, I suppose I could. He said, well, if you do, I'll write a foreword for it. And I was like, well, then I'm writing one. So, because when am I ever going to get a foreword from Bernard Cornwell? So, as a result of that, I was writing it like kind of under a time crunch, and COVID had hit. So I couldn't get over to England to get a bunch of photos and things that I wanted to take. I had a list of, I've been to that location several times, but I didn't have this picture, and dang it, I really want that picture. So I was able to talk to the Wirral archaeology people and say, hey, can you send somebody out to get go here, get a picture of this? Like, yep. And the next day there's a amazing picture, and you have rights to it, have fun. They have been incredible. They continue. Just yesterday, I got another email about more finds that have been found as they continue to keep me informed of progress. So they're doing incredible work. They're awesome. They really are.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing. I will say, Mike's probably being a little bit humble on this, but he did find the battlefield, just located it. It is also seems once you get to there, and those of you who are in England or planning to go up to Wirral, and you recognize that this is the best spot for them to come. It's the closest to Ireland. It's the closest to Scotland. They don't have to go all the way around. There are alternatives that have been proposed on the other side of the island, which means this entire fleet is going through the northern islands above Scotland. Doesn't make sense. This also, and Mike and I say this always when we're studying battlefields, the simplest is probably the right. I mean, these guys aren't stupid. They're not going to do something stupid. And this is the side of the battle that I think is the most logical. It's the easiest to get to, the easiest to explain, which of course is why you still get the death threats. But anyway, now let's go to the battle now. So we've got armies that are essentially using the same tactic, the shield wall. Explain the shield wall.
The shield wall. I mean, the best we can do, trying to explain it. You get people. I was just reviewing a book yesterday. I won't say who it was or whatever. That was like, this is exactly how it was done. This is exactly how they held the shield. This is exactly, and maybe, but also maybe not. All we can really say with utter certainty is that you got a line of dudes. Maybe some dudettes. Probably not though. Probably mostly dudes.
Probably not.
Mostly dudes.
None mentioned in this battle.
And they are lining up side by side. They've got shields, and they make a literal wall of them. Now, whether or not those shields are edge to edge or overlapping slightly, we get various people have various points of view on this. I'm always kind of like, is that the hill you're going to die on? I don't, it's. Nobody's checking on the field. Like, sometimes they probably overlap, sometimes they weren't. It's a line of dudes making a wall of shields that is like a defensive fortification made of people bearing shields. Rather than ditch work and a wall, we will make ourselves a wall. And as these shield walls sort of get near each other, you're throwing things over the top of the wall, and as anybody gets close, of course, you're trying to poke things through the wall or underneath the wall, like any way, or over the wall, like any way you can, behind the protection you've got, in order to weaken the other side, and to try and create an opening, to try and break the shield wall. And once that is broken, then you can press through, right, and disintegrate the other line and cause a rout. And in this case, they're using the exact same tactics on both sides. You probably couldn't tell on the field if you pulled two guys off. You'd be like, well, which side are you? Like, what? It's not like this was. Well, this side is on horses and wearing shining armor, and that one isn't. They got the same kind of stuff. They're using the same techniques. It was because of this, the nature of shield wall warfare, and the fact that this went on so long, which means the sides must have been very closely matched. Normally, a battle sort of typically unfolds very quickly as one side loses hard or an opening gets made or whatever, and they break and run, and everybody gets it in the back. This went on by the Potok accounts, and again, this makes sense given everything else we hear about it. It went on pretty much all day, and the carnage must have been never greater slaughter. I mean, it must have been. It must have been, as they just sat there and mashed against one another. I try to explain in the book not only, Chris, like exactly where I think this happened, given the information we have, but also what this must have been like for these men. And it's not a place you'd want to be.
No, but they're determined. I mean, the one thing you got to think about is determined. Most medieval battles that we read about, they fight until one side leaves.
Yeah.
And they leave because they don't think they're going to win or want to save their lives. Survival, as you said at the beginning. In this case, they fight for a very long time. Now, we should say, of course, this is not a new tactic. The Romans, the Greeks used it. The Mesopotamian armies all used these kind of field fortifications with shields. That was a major part.
Yeah.
Will disappear a little towards the end of the Middle Ages when you begin to see more fully armored individuals. But let's just talk about it. So we know the shield's an important weapon on both sides. important defensive arm on both sides. What else do we know about what these guys are wielding? What are their weapons? Are they wearing do the majority have helmets? Do they have mail armor?
So a lot of those questions we can't answer, right? We can answer them as best we can statistically, right? Probably not a lot of helmets, frankly, because that's kind of an expensive thing.
Yeah.
But they would have been there, right? I mean, Æthelstan's wearing one, for God's sake. All the good guys are good guys. I shouldn't say good guys, like the wealthy guys. They're all going to have that kind of stuff. But a lot of this, I mean, we're talking about probably, I don't know, 10,000, 15,000 people total on this field. Like, they're not all going to be in the same kit, and they're not all going to be in the best kit. And one of the problems that a lot of times we have with reenactors is this imagining of, like, there is a kit, and that's what everybody's wearing, and they're all going to look this way, and that's not the way it is. I'm sorry, Hollywood, but no, that's not how they did this. It was, you were wearing what you had, which was a reflection of your wealth and status, or maybe somebody in your dad happened to pull something off of a corpse, and it stayed in the family in case somebody had to go to war, and you were able to fit into it. Like, so cool, you've got that. So it would have been actually kind of a motley arrangement, in the sense that this person's got a sword, this person's got an axe, this person's got a spear, this person's got a club, that guy's got a shovel. Like, it's going to be non-standardized. Now, we know things like that won't be there, right? Like, there probably aren't really any longbows there. Like, there's not things that are not going to be there because they are not either popularized or aren't there technologically yet. We can take all that off the field, and what we're left with is, again, a sort of organically put together army, in this case armies, right? Because even on the one side you got multiple armies, and they're wearing their best stuff, because it's a matter of life and death. So you're going to have your best stuff with you. You're going to use the best stuff you've got, but what that is going to be ranges wildly from man to man in the army. So, I mean, you're the man on this stuff, Kelly. I'm talking.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. And one of the things you got to understand is the makeup of the army. So at this period, we do not have professional forces. We do have a few. So every king's going to have his retinue. Every noble there is going to have a retinue of some sort, and they're going to be well armed and armored, both because they are within that retinue, they get the arms and armor from the king, who's a little bit more wealthy, but also because they're veterans. And so they will have gained arms and armor off of individuals who are not in need of it anymore because they've lost in front of them. That has to be understood. And in fact, one of the interesting things, the archaeological field that a lot of these were found in, appears to be slag, what we would call slag, not actually industrial slag, but it appears to be a place where all the non-usable stuff was tossed, because anything that was still there, if they've got a good axe head, you can stick another a wooden handle on it. If you've got a dagger, you can do the same with a hilt. As long as it's good and it can be used again, it will be used again. And especially ones that are more expensive, helmets and armor, would have been stripped off. Basically, the shield here is a wooden shield. It's got some iron parts on it, maybe an iron rim, but it's not that expensive to make. And so that's the most important thing. And of course, that's why we call it a shield wall. It isn't a shield minus 8 or 10 guys wall. But the other thing is a lot of this comes from recruitment. So you have the retinues of the 5 kings on there. Beyond that, who are the guys fighting?
Beyond the
retinues, the paid men.
Well, I mean, the people that are there are either pressed into service or had, in some cases, volunteered for it in the hopes of getting some loot. But by and large, this is going to be people sort of pressed into service. We're going, and you're coming with us, and there's no saying no to this.
Yeah.
But that's what's happening, and at the upper levels there'll be these agreements and that have been put in place. Again, I wish we had them, but everybody below that in the sort of pyramid scheme is, no, we're all going. And if you're lucky, you'll get something out of it
different
by,
reasons.
with loot or, land. We don't know what their, even their agreement with each other was.
Well, they may just be protecting their own. So these are going to be farmers from local farmsteads that might be protecting their farms.
On the English side,
they'll
definitely.
be destroyed
On the English
if
side,
they lose.
Athelstan's
Yeah.
call is like, if you don't get out there and fight, your family, your land, everything's gone. There's no question that from his perspective, yeah, they're rolling in, they're fighting for their homeland, they're fighting for their lives and the lives of their loved ones. That's obviously not the case with the other side who are invading. So yeah, there is definitely between the two a different sort of sense of why they are there, and obviously that has an effect on how things roll out in the moment.
Yeah, but booty and land and other things. I mean, there's promises made. Important thing is when we're describing here is professional and non-professional troops.
Yeah.
And I know modernists don't like us to use those terms, but basically the retinue is the king. The ones that are paid to be there are going to be soldiers full time, garrisoning the fortifications when they're not actually in warfare. And then you have the ones that are called into service at that point in time. With the shield wall, it's a little more easy to operate. And again, the shields are cheaper. They can be given to everybody and just go out and hold on to one and be close to your guy next to you. Don't run.
Yeah, stay close.
Don't make a hole there.
And
not a lot of cavalry. Very few archers. We think from the sources.
We think very few. I mean, there isn't really mention of them in the sources, and so the best we can do is extrapolate then from other battles and sources, and we don't tend to see that much. So yeah, we don't anticipate there was a lot of bow there. There was probably horse bringing people to the field, but then they would dismount and form up the wall. And yeah, the tactics of a wall are pretty easy. Like you said, you just like don't leave a break, and if you're behind and the guy in front of you goes down, close that gap. Like move up and close that. You got to step on that guy. We don't care. Close that gap, because if it's open, everybody's dead. So it's very much you're protecting the men on either side of you, and that collectively then protects the whole. And until for whatever reason, and we don't know what it is that breaks the wall of the Allies against the English. We don't know what it is that breaks them. We just know that it does break in the end.
Yeah. It's probably also where we get the phrase "mind the gap." There's no doubt.
False, but okay.
So yeah, let's get back to this question. So we've got the shield walls against the shield wall. It lasts for a very long time. You say you don't know. We don't know. What's your thought? Why is it that the English stay solid and the other side, the Allies break? Is it because they're allies? Because they don't have that same leadership?
If I had to take a guess, I do think it is absolutely vital here that in a balanced fight, one of these is fighting for kith and kin and country. The other is fighting for a hoped for booty or whatever. One of those is a better motivator than the other. And I can't sort of remove that in my envisioning of what happens here. So I do think that there is a less of a willingness to break on the English side. That's not to say that obviously the Allies weren't dedicated. They were incredibly dedicated. This thing lasted all day. But I do think, when the wavering came, it makes more sense to me that the wavering came on the part of the Allies, who were, what am I fighting for? The king is going to get most of the stuff, that at some level, that was what was happening. Was there some heroic act that some person made? Maybe. We have no record of it except for Egil's saga, which is no, that's got all kinds of crazy stuff happening that wasn't reality. So we just don't know, except to know that the shield wall, broke. And when it did, the Allies fled running back to the sea, we're told, to their ships, and departed on their ships again. That night, that it was a running engagement back to the ships. and they were getting mowed down the whole way. That I suspect that there were points here and there where bands in the retreat tried to gather up and stave off the advance to give their countrymen a chance to get away. There were probably these kind of like, heroic last stands, if you will. But yeah, they ultimately get run all the way to the sea and flee, and that's the end of the battle.
Yeah, and they're carrying a heavy shield. They'll drop that.
Oh yeah,
They may drop other weapons. Getting away is important. Now, the interesting thing is as you say, they're not going back. So they're not trying to find a forest to hide in. They're not going back on land. They're going back to the ships.
Yeah.
So that even gives more encouragement to drop everything that's going to hold you back, and then just be faster than anybody else on there, and you'll get away.
Yeah, it's like the old joke of how do you get away from a bear? Like be faster than the guy next to you. I mean, that's part of what's going on here. They're dropping anything they can to get away.
But it also means they're completely defenseless. So it's only the ones that still are retaining their shields. Maybe they're a little more professional, and they will turn if they're protecting a king. They may turn. Of course, there's 5 of them dead on the field, so those protectors have no more motive there. But I think that's important to recognize is that as they're, we do see a lot of slaughter in medieval warfare after the battle has been decided.
Yeah.
And it's because a lot of those men are think about it. They're weary. They've been carried on this. The adrenaline has been pumping, and it's still pumping, but it's now completely different. And they're going to get run down. Let alone if the English have horses, could get on them and ride them down.
They'll literally run them down.
Yeah. So I'm sure that the slaughter was from the battlefield all the way back to the ship.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd be curious what you think about this. I tend to tell my students that, if I was to somehow be able to tabulate across the Middle Ages, the amount who died in the kind of immediate press of the engagement, and the amount that died in the rout afterwards, that more died getting it in the back than got it on the actual field. And they're always surprised by that. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with it. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why we have these very large numbers for the defeated of individuals who are killed and wounded in comparison to the ones who win. And it's because those who are running are going to be picked off. Remember, there's no chivalry here. There's nobody protecting anybody at this point. And these are enemies. They've just fought you, and they're different. They're foreigners, and everything's going against them. So I do think this is the case, and it needs to be emphasized more often as well. That the reason we have fewer dying at Agincourt is not necessarily of the English than the French. Not necessarily because they're dying right there in the battle. There's a lot that are killed afterwards.
Absolutely.
Agincourt may not be a good example. Crecy would be a better example because they're trying to flee, and it's dark and they can't see a lot of people.
I mean, I think you're right. Agincourt is a better example. Probably we could talk about this in another episode.
Okay.
But because Crecy, because it's dark, I don't think a lot of those guys. Down, right?
Well, at that point,
but yeah, I'm glad that you agree on this notion that most people are dying getting it in the back, and we see that actually with some of the battle remains that we found like at Towton and stuff like that. So those guys were run down.
Well, if you want to use a perfect example of this, because we're talking about escaping by the sea, would be Marathon. So once the Greeks established they have the battlefield, the Persians are running back on the ships. Herodotus tells us there's a whole number that are killed between the ships and the lines of Persians who are trying to flee onto the ships, and how many fewer ships are leaving than had arrived.
Yeah.
Do we have an indication about how many ships go?
We don't. No, I was just about to say I wish we did. All we get is the Northmen leaving their nailed ships. So it's talking about a specific kind of ship there, but they're nars basically. So they've left in the ships, but it doesn't say how many. The number 615 comes from some years after the battle, not a lot after the battle, but
so maybe a slight exaggeration.
Might be,
although not unusual. I mean, if if you think about some of the ships that are still existing, we have one that I guess we could call in the Roskilde, and it can hold a number of people, but not all the ships are going to be that. I mean, it was a specifically built warship. So if you got anything else that's a smaller ship, you're not going to have as many people on there.
Yeah.
So they're escaping in ships that they can protect themselves with, and they're bigger vessels, probably a little further out on the shore too. You could,
and Never Greater Slaughter, I go over the numbers on all this kind of stuff, and the conclusion I come to is that the number is about probably 615 is about right, given the size of these armies, the fact there's 3 of them. Comparing it to other engagements at the time, that's probably about right. It's probably not much of an exaggeration, which is just amazing. So
and if they exaggerate, they always go in the thousands. They don't necessarily come down to.
There were 20,000 ships. Like, sure they were. Sure.
No, I agree with you, and in fact, I will say I agree with Mike's conclusions in his book, and on the battlefield. So it's I think you've done a very good job. Bernard Cornwell fills in the gaps by putting all the people with names in the battle, but you've got the battle as it's historically done, and I think it's wonderful and a good service. And
thank you, Kelly.
Sorry to the death threats, but you guys are all wrong.
I wrote the book specifically to convince you.
Yeah, well, that's so. I appreciate.
Well,
that.
Hey,
I'm the hardest one to convince, no doubt.
So if I did that,
well, what about the quicksand? What about the What about the morass? What about everything? It is a very interesting place because probably if we did know a little bit more about the archaeology, and the archaeologists have told us this, but probably if we knew a little bit about the geology and could trace where the shore was and where the marshes were, because nobody is going to go in or out of the battle over marshland. And it's very clear that there was marshland around that region. It would have been cleared no matter what. But a lot of that is dried up or has been utilized for farming.
Yeah, a lot of it's been drained. Yeah, where I think the ships were is the pool that's no longer there.
It's no longer
there. It's all been drained out. But at the upper right corner, if you will, of Wirral Peninsula, there used to be a massive pool there. I mean, it's a wonderful harborage. And it's enough to fit that many ships. It's in the right spot. The Roman road goes from there, like straight down the peninsula, right to where I think the battle happened. So, all
that is needed. We've said this last week, talking about Hastings. We'll say it probably every single one of these podcasts will say, if you don't have the right stuff there, as far as getting to the battlefield, getting away from the battlefield, someplace to put your ships. Nobody has got like an anchor and then swimming to shore.
Yeah,
this is not the tradition. You've got to shore your boats, and you've got to be able to have them accessible when you leave.
Yeah.
And those are all things we have to think about.
Yep, you got it.
Never Greater Slaughter. You have in fact convinced me.
So I think they're probably closing up the bar here, man.
I think so too. I'm ready for my mead hangover.
It was someday we'll talk about Livingston's hangover that he got. It was quite extraordinary. So
and I'm no doubt those that made it away, heading back to Ireland, drinking the mead that they left on board, all were looking for a hangover. Because they lost.
They lost badly. They lost really badly. Yeah. So Battle of Brunanburh, 937, a battle that huge in history, but very little remembered today. So hopefully everybody learned a little something there. Appreciate you all listening. So I hope that you can join us for our next episode of Bow and Blade, when we'll be talking about Joan of Arc and the Siege of Orleans. Very excited about this because you have, I hope, heard of Joan of Arc. And
spoiler alert, she really does exist.
She does exist, and I don't know that anybody on this planet knows more about Joan of Arc than Mr. Kelly DeVries here. So, really looking forward to that talk. It's going to be awesome. So, thank you all for listening. This podcast is sponsored by Medievalist.net. So, the best way to support us, other than of course just buying our books and sending us checks or buying us a drink next time at the bar, would be to join their Patreon. You can get some swell offers and other goodies. So please do visit patreon.com/medievalists. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
See ya.